My father passed away, leaving me an old warehouse. My brother kept the beach house. At dinner, my wife called me useless, then kicked me out. That night, I slept in the warehouse. And froze when I saw what was inside. The night my wife told me to go sleep in your warehouse, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because at 52 years old, standing in my brother's Malibu dining room while he poured $300 bourbon into crystal glasses, I realized something cold and irreversible. I had spent 3 decades being the responsible one and somehow ended up the disposable one. Michael wouldn't understand, my brother Jason said, smiling at the investors seated around the long oak table. He's more of a paperwork guy. Laughter followed, soft, polite cutting. Lauren didn't defend me. She adjusted her wine glass and said, "Well, at least one Turner knows how to build something." That was the moment. That was the fracture. And it only got worse. My father, Richard Turner, died 6 weeks earlier. Pancreatic cancer, quick and merciless. He had been a quiet man, practical, a machinist who turned wrenches for 40 years at the Long Beach shipyard. He didn't believe in flashy things. He believed in land. When the will was read, Jason received the Malibu beach house, a property Dad had bought decades ago before the coastline exploded in value. I received an industrial warehouse near the old port district. Jason had leaned back in the leather conference chair at the attorney's office and said, "Dad knew you like structure, Mike. Concrete, steel, something sturdy." He said it like it was a compliment. The warehouse was 14,000 square feet of rusted siding and cracked asphalt. The beach house overlooked the Pacific. Jason insisted it was equal. "Market value fluctuates," he said. "And let's be honest, you're not exactly beachfront material." I didn't argue. I rarely did. Because my role in this family had always been simple. Absorb tension, fix problems, balance books. Jason built image. I maintained stability. That night at the Malibu house was supposed to be a celebration of legacy. Jason had already refinanced the property, installed glass railings, and hired a media consultant. He was hosting potential investors for a real estate syndicate he called Turner Coastal Ventures. Lauren was glowing under the recessed lighting. She had always admired ambition, especially Jason's version of it. I stood near the end of the table, hands loosely folded, listening to Jason explain leverage ratios with confidence he did not fully possess. One of the investors asked, "What happened to the industrial property I saw that listed in probate filings?" Jason smirked. "Oh, that thing. It's basically scrap land. Michael took it. He's always been good at warehouses." Laughter again. Lauren said lightly, "He'll probably turn it into a spreadsheet." The investors chuckled. Someone tapped their fork against a plate. I felt heat climb my neck, but I kept my expression steady. I have audited supply chains in Texas heat and Michigan snow. I have testified before compliance boards. I know how to sit still while someone underestimates me. But humiliation inside your own marriage is a different temperature. After the guests left, the house grew quiet. Ocean wind pressed softly against the glass walls. Lauren stood by the kitchen island, arms folded. "You didn't say much tonight." "I wasn't asked much." She sighed. "Jason's trying to build something. You could at least act supportive. I've paid property taxes on that warehouse for years while Jason refinanced the beach house twice. That's different." "How?" "Because Jason has vision." There it was. The word I'd been competing with for 15 years. Vision. "And what do I have?" I asked. She hesitated. "Stability," she said finally. "But stability doesn't grow." I watched her face. The subtle disappointment she no longer tried to hide. "You know what investors see," she continued. "They see momentum. They see risk-taking. They don't see someone who double-checks invoices. I protect us from what progress?" The conversation felt familiar. A rerun with sharper edges. Then she said it. "You're 52, Michael, and your biggest asset is a condemned warehouse." It landed heavier than I expected. "I kept us out of debt," I said quietly. "You kept us small." Silence. Ocean wind again. Then she walked to the front door, opened it, and said, "Maybe you should figure out who you are without leaning on Jason's shadow." I didn't move. She looked at me, not angry, not hysterical, just finished. "If that warehouse means so much to you," she added, "go stay there tonight." She didn't shout. She didn't slam anything. She simply closed the door after I stepped outside. The lock clicked. Clean. Final. I stood on the walkway for a full minute, watching the reflection of the house in the dark glass. Inside, Jason was laughing at something on his phone. I checked my pockets. Wallet, phone, keys. The warehouse key was still on my ring. I drove the 28 miles to Long Beach in silence. No music, no calls, just the low hum of freeway tires and the echo of Lauren's words. Your biggest asset is a condemned warehouse. When I pulled up, the industrial district was asleep. Street lights flickered over cracked pavement. The port cranes stood like skeletal giants against the night sky. The warehouse gate creaked when I unlocked it. The rolling steel door groaned upward with resistance. Inside it smelled like oil salt air and old dust. I stepped in. The concrete floor was cool under my shoes. Empty space. Shadowed beams. No ocean view. No investors. Just 14,000 square feet of silence. I let the door roll shut behind me. The echo lingered. For the first time that night, my breathing slowed. I walked to the center of the floor and looked up at the metal trusses. Condemned warehouse, I muttered. Then I saw it. A thick envelope taped to the inside of the breaker panel. Property tax notice stamped 2 days earlier and beneath the classification line in bold municipal print. Industrial multi-use subsurface easement active. Subsurface easement. I stood there longer than I should have. Jason had handled most estate communications. Why hadn't he mentioned that? I folded the notice carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. The air inside the warehouse felt different now. Not warmer, not colder, just unfinished. I dragged an old tarp from the corner and laid it flat. Used my folded jacket as a pillow. And as I lay there staring into the dark rafters, one thought pressed steadily into my mind. Jason never came here. Not once in 5 years. He never looked behind walls, never opened breaker panels, never read municipal classifications. He saw rust. I saw language. And language is where ownership lives. I closed my eyes. Not defeated. Not yet. Because somewhere between the word condemned and the word easement, something didn't add up. And I have built my entire life on noticing what doesn't add up. I woke before sunrise to the sound of metal ticking. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. Then the smell hit me. Salt, rust, old engine oil baked into concrete. The industrial district was already warming the air heavy. Even at 5:30 a.m. a faint orange glow leaked through the high, grimy windows, cutting the darkness into long geometric shapes. I sat up slowly on the tarp joint stiff and listened. Warehouses have a language. Pipes contract. Roof panels shift. Wind hums through seams. If you stay still long enough, the building tells you whether it's stable. This one wasn't dying. It was quiet. Yes. Neglected. Certainly, but structurally intact. I walked to the breaker panel and opened it again. Subsurface easement active. The phrase bothered me. In supply chain auditing, vague language hides leverage. You don't label something active unless something is flowing through it physically or financially. I ran my hand along the conduit lines feeding into the main panel. Several breakers were labeled in faded marker. Lighting dock power west office Zone C port feed. Zone C had a small red dot next to it, not factory labeled, hand marked. I pressed my fingers against the metal casing. Warm. Not hot, but warm. At 6 o'clock in the morning, in a building with nothing running that shouldn't happen. I flipped open the tax envelope again and read the classification line carefully. The legal description referenced Parcel 48B and something called a subterranean right-of-way filed 1998, the year Dad expanded the warehouse. The year he stopped talking about selling it. I pulled out my phone and searched county records. The loading icon spun longer than I liked, but eventually the scan deed surfaced. There it was, an attachment I had never seen before. Right-of-way granted to Pacific Coastal Infrastructure Group for fiber routing and secure utility conduit. Fiber routing. Secure conduit, not storage, not industrial infrastructure. I sat back on my heels. Jason had sold half the story to himself. He saw land. Dad saw access. By 9 a.m., the sun had turned the metal siding into a slow oven. Sweat gathered at the back of my neck as I dialed the utility company listed on the breaker panel. After navigating automated menus and hold music that sounded like a broken elevator tune, a woman named Denise picked up, City Grid Services. How can I help you? I'm reviewing usage on an industrial parcel in Long Beach. Parcel 48B. She typed. I could hear it. Sir, that meter isn't on city distribution. It isn't? No. That building is fed through a private industrial substation. It's a legacy connection. Legacy how? Connected to Port Authority infrastructure. You'd need to contact Pacific Coastal. Does it bill monthly? Yes, through a state or title holder. Has it been active? Pause. Yes, sir. Continuous draw. Continuous as in 24-hour consumption. Yes. Has anyone disputed it? No, sir. I thanked her and hung up. Continuous draw. Not fluctuating. Constant. Data doesn't lie. Someone or something was operating beneath this building. Around noon, a black SUV rolled up outside. I didn't need to check the window to know who it was. Jason stepped out wearing sunglasses and a linen button-down like he was arriving at a marina, not a port district. He didn't knock. He never knocked. The rolling door groaned open, sunlight slicing into the interior. "What the hell are you doing, Mike?" he said, stepping inside and immediately wiping sweat from his forehead. "It smells like a shipyard funeral in here." "I slept," I said evenly. "You're serious? Lauren told me you stormed off." "I didn't storm." He waved it off. "Look, I don't care about domestic drama. What I care about is this." He tossed an envelope at me. "Final notice. Utility account delinquent. Amount due $8,742.19. $8,000? I asked. "It's been accruing. You're the one living here now. I've used zero electricity. Not my problem. Transfer the account into your name. I'm not carrying dead weight." "Dead weight?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Have you ever checked the meter?" I asked. He laughed. "It's a warehouse, Mike, not Fort Knox. Have you ever reviewed the deed attachments?" He rolled his eyes. "I hired people for that." "Did you read them?" He stepped closer, irritation tightening his jaw. "You think Dad left something hidden? Is that what this is? Some fantasy where the boring brother finds buried treasure?" I didn't answer. He misread silence as surrender. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "I have a buyer lined up for this land. Mixed developer. They'll clear it. Build lofts. I need clean title. No delinquent bills. When are you closing?" 3 weeks. "And have you disclosed subsurface rights?" He blinked. "What to rent?" "Easements. Infrastructure." He scoffed. "It's junk pipe under dirt." "Relax. Junk pipe." I walked to the breaker panel and opened it. "Feel that?" I said. He hesitated, then pressed his palm against the metal. "It's warm," he said reluctantly. "Nothing inside is running. So something under it is." He pulled his hand back like he touched something contagious. "You're overthinking this," he snapped. "Transfer the utilities, clean it up, or I'll have the meter disconnected and the building condemned officially." "That would require disclosure," I said. He narrowed his eyes. "You always do this," he muttered. "You complicate simple things." "No, I clarify them." He turned and walked back toward the sunlight. As he reached the door, he said without looking back, "You were always better at cleaning up messes than making something big." The door rolled shut behind him. The building hummed faintly in the heat. I walked back to the breaker panel. Zone C, port feed, subsurface easement active. 3 weeks until closing, and for the first time in years, Jason was moving faster than he understood, which meant he was vulnerable. I pulled out my phone and searched Pacific Coastal Infrastructure Group. The name redirected to a subsidiary, which redirected again, eventually landing on a federal contractor page: secure routing services, defense-compliant fiber networks, subterranean hardened vault systems. My pulse didn't spike, it steadied. Because this wasn't buried treasure. It was leverage. And leverage, when misfiled, becomes ownership. I looked around the warehouse one more time. Jason saw scrapland. Lauren saw embarrassment. But beneath my boots, below concrete and rust, something expensive was running 24 hours a day. And neither of them had ever asked why. The next morning, the heat arrived early. By 8 a.m., the inside of the warehouse felt like the interior of a parked truck in August. Light filtered through the grimy windows in pale strips, illuminating dust that hung in the air like suspended time. I had moved my tarp closer to the east wall where there was at least the illusion of shade. The utility notice sat open beside me. $8,742.19. Jason's handwriting was scrolled across the top in blue ink. "Transfer immediately." I studied the detailed usage graph printed on the second page. Flat. Perfectly flat, not a peak, not a dip. In a normal structure, power consumption breathes. It rises when equipment runs, falls at night, spikes during use. This line was a ruler drawn across the month. High draw constant. That wasn't lighting. That wasn't refrigeration. That was infrastructure. I zoomed in on the billing details. Source classification, industrial substation, PSIG. There it was again. Pacific Coastal Infrastructure Group. I searched deeper. Corporate registry filings, federal subcontract disclosures. I traced the paper trail the way I would trace inventory leakage in a distribution network. PSIG wasn't a warehouse utilities vendor. It was a hardened fiber contractor tied to defense routing redundancies along the West Coast. In plain English, secure communications under my warehouse. I leaned back against a stack of old shipping pallets and closed my eyes for a moment. Dad had never trusted banks. He trusted land. But land connected to data. That was something else. Around noon, a white city pickup truck pulled up outside. I hadn't called for one, but Jason had. A man stepped out wearing a municipal vest with the logo of the Long Beach Utility Authority stitched on the front. He introduced himself as Daniel Ruiz. Got a transfer request and possible disconnect notice, he said, stepping inside and immediately squinting at the dim interior. You the current occupant? I'm the co-heir, I replied. Michael Turner. He nodded, scanning the breaker panel. You running equipment? No. He opened the panel and checked the feed. His eyebrows rose slightly. That's odd. What is this feed isn't city supplied? It's patched through a secondary industrial grid. Rare these days. Who maintains it? He hesitated. Technically Pacific Coastal, but those lines are under federal classification. We don't touch them. Can it be disconnected? He gave me a look. You can't just unplug a government backbone because your brother's mad. The word brother hung in the air longer than I expected. Daniel checked the meter housing outside. He ran a handheld scanner across it and let out a low whistle. This is pulling consistent load, he said. Heavy but stable. That's climate control or server grade draw. There are no servers here. He tapped the side of the unit. Then they're not here. He looked at me more carefully now. You know what's under this parcel? Not yet. He wiped his hands on his jeans. Off-record buildings like this near Port Corridor sometimes got retrofitted in the late 90s for redundancy vaults, earthquake-proof routing chambers, climate-stabilized fiber channels, private contract stuff, accessible from inside, usually through a sealed interior access point or external hatch. He paused. You planning to sell? My brother is. He nodded slowly. Well, whoever buys it better read the attachments. After he left, the warehouse felt different. Not mysterious. Define. There's a difference. Mystery implies fantasy. Definition implies paperwork. I walked the perimeter slowly studying the floor. If Dad had granted subsurface access in 1998, there had to be a maintenance portal somewhere. I found it near the west wall, a square steel plate flush with the concrete, painted over, almost invisible unless you were looking for seams. 4 recessed bolts. I crouched down and brushed away dust stamped faintly on the metal. SIG access authorized personnel only. My pulse remained steady. Emotion clouds judgment. Documentation clarifies it. I stood and called the estate attorney listed in Dad's probate file. Evelyn Carter answered on the 3rd ring. Michael, everything all right? I need to review the original 1998 easement filing. There was silence on her end. You found something? She said quietly. I found language. She sighed. Your father insisted that attachment remain intact. Jason tried to classify it as obsolete. Is it? No. Another pause. Michael, that easement includes annual lease compensation tied to federal infrastructure use. The payments were structured to route through the estate trust until both heirs confirmed distribution. My grip tightened slightly around the phone. How much escalating annually? Last disbursement I saw was 5 years ago before your father consolidated accounts. It was approximately $180,000 that year. I stared at the steel plate on the floor. Where did the payments go? They were redirected to a dormant estate account pending confirmation of ownership structure. Your father wanted to protect it from liquidation from Jason. I can't speculate, but you can confirm. She hesitated. Yes. And if the land is sold, the subsurface lease must be disclosed and either transferred or bought out. Federal contracts don't vanish. How much would a buyout cost? At current valuation, conservative estimate between 2 and 3 million. I felt the shift then, not excitement, not revenge, alignment. Jason thought he was selling scrap land for $400,000. He was standing on top of infrastructure worth 10 times that without realizing it. Evelyn, I said carefully, if Jason attempts to sell without disclosing subsurface rights, it would constitute misrepresentation and liability, substantial. I ended the call and sat down on an overturned crate. For 30 years, I had been the quiet one, the cleaner, the fixer, the one who double-cheat. Jason built image. I read attachments. Lauren chased momentum. I traced clauses. Now, the clause was beneath my feet. 3 weeks until closing and Jason had just threatened to disconnect a federal utility line, which meant he was operating blind. Blind men move fast. Auditors wait. I ran my hand once more over the steel access plate. SIG access authorized personnel only. Dad hadn't left me a warehouse. He had left me a conduit. And for the first time since Lauren closed that door, I felt something unfamiliar but precise. Control. The steel access plate stayed in my line of sight for the rest of the afternoon. I didn't open it. Not yet. Curiosity without authority is trespassing. And I had spent my career avoiding trespass, legal, financial, emotional. Instead, I drove to downtown Long Beach and walked into Evelyn Carter's office. She had represented my father for almost 20 years. Soft-spoken, meticulous, the kind of attorney who read footnotes before headlines. Her office smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. A contrast to the diesel air I'd been breathing all morning. She didn't waste time. "You've seen the utility draw," she said as soon as I sat down. "Yes, and you found the access plate." "Yes." She folded her hands. "Your father insisted on very specific language in the 1998 agreement. He believed infrastructure would outlast market cycles. Jason thought it was obsolete. Jason never read it." She pulled a thick file from a cabinet and placed it in front of me. Pacific Coastal Infrastructure Group Subterranean Lease and Right-of Way. Stamped Federal Defense Subcontract. I flipped through the pages slowly. Term length 30 years renewable. Annual lease payments with 5-year escalators. Non-disclosure clauses. Emergency access rights. Buyout provision based on infrastructure replacement cost. I stopped at the payment schedule. Year 1, $75,000. Year 5, $110,000. Year 10, $150,000. Year 15, $180,000. Year 225,000. Year 25, $310,000. We were in year 25. "Has it been paid?" I asked. "Yes," Evelyn said. "But after your father consolidated, accounts payments were directed to the estate holding trust pending final beneficiary confirmation. And that confirmation never happened." She gave me a measured look. "Jason submitted incomplete documentation twice. Your father refused to sign off on sole ownership before he passed." "Why?" "Because he knew the value of what was below the warehouse." I leaned back. Jason had been racing to refinance the beach house to expand, to leverage, all while sitting on a contract that generated more stable income than any speculative syndicate. "Can Jason legally sell the land?" I asked. "He can attempt to," she said carefully. "But any buyer conducting proper due diligence would uncover the subsurface lease, and if he doesn't disclose it, then he exposes himself to litigation." I nodded. There was one more question. "If Jason wanted to avoid liability," I said slowly, "could he transfer subsurface rights to me?" "Yes, even if he doesn't fully understand their value." "Yes, as long as it's written. As long as it's written and executed properly." I closed the file. For years, Jason had operated on momentum. Deals made quickly, documents skimmed, confidence weaponized. He had always assumed I would correct whatever he overlooked. This time I wouldn't correct it. I would let it stand. That evening Jason called. "I have the developer flying in next week," he said without greeting. "They're offering $450 for the land." I asked for the dirt and steel. "Yes. And subsurface." He exhaled sharply. "You're obsessed with that." "Because it exists. Mike, nobody cares about a buried fiber line from the 90s. Federal contractors care." Silence. "I need the title clean." He continued. "Utilities contents, anything that complicates inspection gone. And if there are complications, there aren't." I let him fill the silence with his own certainty. "Transfer the interior contents to your name," he said finally. "All of it. Scrap fixtures, whatever's left. I don't want liability after closing." "In writing?" "Yes, obviously in writing. Include subsurface rights." He paused. "Why would I include that?" "To protect yourself." He scoffed. "From what?" "From federal misrepresentation." The word federal slowed him. "You're exaggerating." "Then you have nothing to lose." A long breath. "I'll draft something." He said, "Good." When I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt precise. The next morning, he emailed a document. Transfer of interior contents and associated structural elements for liability purposes. He had written it himself. Sloppy but binding. All fixtures, attachments, mechanical systems, and associated structural rights not expressly reserved by seller. He hadn't expressly reserved subsurface rights because he didn't think of them as rights. He thought of them as plumbing. I printed the document and drove it to Evelyn. She read it twice. "He's transferring more than he realizes," she said. "Is it enforceable with notarization?" "Yes." We met Jason at a coffee shop near the marina. He wore sunglasses indoors. He signed without hesitation. "Congratulations," he said lightly. "You're officially the owner of a pile of rust." I signed. We notarized. He shook my hand as if he were doing me a favor. On the drive back to the warehouse, I felt something settle. Not anger, not revenge, gravity. I parked inside the gate and stood over the steel access plate again. This time, I unlocked it. The bolts came loose with steady resistance. When I lifted the plate, cool air drifted upward. Not refrigerated, controlled. A narrow steel ladder descended into a concrete chamber illuminated by soft indirect lighting. I climbed down slowly. The room below wasn't large, maybe 20 feet wide, but it was immaculate. Fiber conduit racks lined the walls. Climate control units hummed quietly. Sealed equipment cabinets bore federal compliance tags. On one wall, a metal plaque read, PSIG, redundant, secure routing node, coastal sector. There it was. Not treasure, not fantasy, infrastructure, quiet, expensive, invisible. I ran my hand along one of the conduit housings. It vibrated faintly, alive. Above me, the warehouse groaned in the afternoon heat. Below me, the future of data transmission flowed without interruption. Dad hadn't left me a burden. He had left me leverage. I climbed back up, replaced the access plate, and secured it. Then I called Pacific Coastal Infrastructure Group. A man named Harold Anduin answered. "I'm calling regarding Parcel 48B, I said. Silence, then careful interest. "Yes," says sober. "I'm the current rights holder." Another pause. We were under the impression ownership was unsettled. It was, and now one of them, it isn't. He cleared his throat. "We have been attempting to route lease payments for several years." "I'm aware." There was a subtle shift in his tone. "Are you interested in maintaining the agreement?" he asked. "Or discussing buyout?" "Discussing," I said. "Good," he replied. For the first time in decades, someone spoke to me not as an afterthought, but as the controlling party. When I hung up, the warehouse felt different again. Not lonely, not condemned, activated. Jason was preparing to sell scrap land. He didn't know the land wasn't the product, it was the platform, and he had just signed it over. The closing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Jason texted me the details as if I were a delivery service he'd hired. 10 a.m. Harborview title. "Be there to confirm vacancy." Vacancy? That word would have amused me once. Now it sounded reckless. For the next 5 days, I moved deliberately. Pacific Coastal Infrastructure Group sent 2 representatives to the warehouse, not in black SUVs, not in secrecy, but in pressed button-down shirts and quiet efficiency. Harold and Guianne arrived with a compliance officer named Marisol Vega. They wore no badges of authority beyond the calm that comes from knowing you are protected by federal contract. We stood over the steel access plate together. "You have documentation?" Harold asked. I handed him the notarized transfer. He read it slowly. "All associated structural rights not expressly reserved by seller," he murmured. He looked up at me. "Your brother did not reserve subsurface." "No." Marisol nodded once. "Then we are speaking with the correct party." They descended into the chamber and conducted their inspection. I stayed above listening to the muted cadence of professional conversation below the concrete. After 40 minutes, they climbed back up. "Mr. Turner," Harold said carefully. "We have been holding 5 years of escrowed lease payments pending confirmation of beneficiary." "How much?" I asked, though I already had an estimate. $2,432,000 including escalation and penalties for delayed routing. The number did not hit me like a lottery win. It landed like validation. "In the buyout?" I asked. Marisol stepped forward. "Based on current infrastructure replacement cost and redundancy value, we would propose a buyout at $3.8 million for subsurface rights only." "Yes. And the land above no operational concern to us." Jason was selling the land for $450,000. He had signed over rights worth nearly 9 times that without reading. "I'll consider the buyout," I said evenly. Harold nodded. "Until then, lease payments will resume quarterly to your designated account." After they left, I stood alone in the warehouse again. Sunlight filtered through the high windows. Dust still floated. Nothing on the surface had changed, but beneath it, value was flowing. That evening, Lauren called. Her voice was softer than it had been in weeks. "Jason says, you're being difficult about the sale." "I'm being precise. He's under pressure." He chose that silence stretched between us. "You've been gone almost a week." She said, "Yes, this isn't sustainable." "What part you warns? You sleeping in a warehouse?" "I'm not sleeping in it. I'm evaluating it." She exhaled. "You always turn everything into analysis and you always turn everything into momentum." She didn't respond. "I didn't mean what I said," she added finally. "Which part about you being small?" I let the quiet sit. "Lauren, I said gently. I was never small. I was stable. There was nothing left to argue about. Thursday arrived clear and bright. Harborview Title occupied a glass building overlooking the marina, a place designed to make transactions feel clean. Jason was already there when I arrived, leaning against the reception desk, sunglasses pushed up on his head. You ready to unload your palace? He joked. I'm ready to confirm paperwork, I said. The developer, a man named Carl Benson, shook my hand firmly. Industrial conversions are hot right now, he said. You brothers sitting on a gold mine. Jason laughed. Not this one. We moved into the conference room. Documents were laid out in careful stacks. Carl reviewed disclosures. Then he paused. Subsurface infrastructure? He asked. Jason waved dismissively. Obsolete fiber lines. Nothing active. Carl looked at me. Active? He asked. I met his gaze calmly. Lease active, payments current. Jason turned toward me sharply. What are you talking about? Carl's attorney leaned forward. Mr. Turner, if subsurface rights are active under federal lease, this property cannot be transferred free and clear without disclosure and assignment. Jason's face lost color. That's ridiculous, he said. It's scrap conduit. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were the notarized transfer Jason had signed, SIG lease confirmation, escrow release statement, federal compliance acknowledgement. Carl's attorney read quickly. Silence thickened. Jason, Carl said slowly. You represented this parcel as unencumbered. It is, Jason insisted. It isn't, I said quietly. His head snapped toward me. You knew? He asked. I read the attachments. Carl closed the folder. This deal cannot proceed under current representations, he said. We will require full infrastructure disclosure and reassessment evaluation. Jason's composure cracked. You transferred liability to him, he said, pointing at me. He owns the contents. Not liability, I corrected. Rights. Carl's attorney spoke carefully. The executed document transfers subsurface structural rights. That includes easements unless expressly reserved. Jason looked as though the air had thinned. You can't be serious, he whispered. I am, I said. The room shifted subtly, not dramatically. Not explosively, just decisively. Jason had built his identity on control, and for the first time, he had miscalculated publicly. Carl stood. We Unk LLB in touch, he said. The developer and his attorney left. Jason remained seated. You did this on purpose, he said. No, I replied. You did. He stared at the table. You were supposed to fix things, he said quietly. I always did, I answered. Outside the marina shimmered in late morning light. Inside the documents lay between us calm, legible final. Jason had chased leverage. I had followed language and language had won. Jason didn't speak for nearly a full minute after the developer walked out. The conference room felt smaller without the illusion of momentum. Sunlight poured through the glass wall overlooking the marina, bright and indifferent. Boats moved in slow arcs across the water as if nothing significant had just shifted. You set me up, Jason said finally, his voice low. I remained seated. No, I said calmly. I asked you to read. He leaned back in his chair, running both hands through his hair. The confidence he wore like a tailored jacket had slipped. What remained was something closer to panic. You could have told me, he said. I did. You didn't say it was worth millions. You didn't ask. He stood abruptly and paced toward the window. 450,000, he muttered. I had that lined up. That would have cleared the bridge loan. The bridge loan? Of course. Jason had leveraged the beach house against projected sale proceeds from the warehouse. He had been counting money he didn't fully understand. I can still fix this, he said, turning back to me. We'll renegotiate, split the subsurface buyout 50-50. It's no longer 50-50, I said evenly. He blinked. What does that mean? It means you transferred subsurface structural rights to me, not liability, ownership. His jaw tightened. That document was about scrap. It wasn't. You knew I wouldn't read it carefully. I didn't answer. Silence is often the most honest response. He exhaled sharply and looked toward the door as if expecting someone to rescue the situation with a technicality. No one did. We left Harborview Title separately. Jason's car pulled out fast tires, chirping lightly against the curb. I drove back to the warehouse. The industrial district looked exactly the same as it had the night Lauren closed the door behind me. Port cranes in the distance, trucks rumbling through intersections, air thick with salt and exhaust. But the difference wasn't visible from the street. It was beneath it. Pacific Coastal Infrastructure Group called that afternoon. Harold's voice carried measured satisfaction. We understand the attempted sale has been suspended. Yes. Would you like to proceed with buyout discussions? I would. We scheduled a formal valuation meeting for Monday. That evening, Lauren came to the warehouse. She stepped carefully over cracked asphalt and heels not designed for industrial ground. The sun was setting behind the port cranes, casting long shadows across the concrete. She paused at the open rolling door and looked inside. "You're really staying here," she said quietly. "For now." She walked in slowly, scanning the rafters, the concrete floor, the stillness. "It's not safe," she said. "It's stable." She stopped a few feet in front of me. "Jason says, you sabotaged the deal." I disclosed what he ignored. "He's under a lot of pressure. He created that pressure." She folded her arms, not defensively, thoughtfully. "There's talk of a lawsuit," she said. "I expect there will be." She hesitated. "And the subsurface rights? They're mine." Her eyes searched my face for exaggeration. "There's a federal lease," I explained. 25 years active, escrowed payments. "How much enough?" She swallowed. "And now, come on, now I decide whether to continue the lease or sell it." The evening air cooled slightly as the sun dipped lower. Lauren walked toward the center of the warehouse and turned slowly in a circle. "I thought this place was worthless," she admitted. "Most people only see what's on the surface." She looked at me carefully. "I didn't mean what I said." "You meant it," I replied gently. "You just didn't understand it." Tears welled briefly in her eyes. Not dramatic, not performative, just quiet realization. "I wanted momentum," she said. "I offered stability. I thought stability was small. It isn't." We stood there in the fading light, surrounded by steel and silence. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "I do," I answered softly. Monday came with clean paperwork and numbers. SIG offered $3.8 million for full subsurface buyout. After taxes and legal structuring, I would clear just under $3 million. Quarterly lease payments were no longer necessary. The buyout would be immediate. I signed, not quickly, not impulsively, but decisively. The funds cleared within 72 hours. Jason called the following week. His tone was no longer sharp. It was strained. "The developer backed out," he said. "They're claiming misrepresentation. I'm aware the bridge loan is due. I'm aware you're just going to let this happen. I'm not letting anything happen." He inhaled shakily. "You always said we were in this together." "No," I said calmly. "You said that." Silence. "I can fix the beach house," he continued. "Refinance, recover. We just need time. Time is expensive and you have it now." "Yes." He didn't ask for money directly. He didn't need to. The request hung between us. "I'm not your safety net anymore," I said quietly. He didn't argue. He simply hung up. A month later, I moved into a modest house inland. Nothing flashy, nothing coastal. Paid in full. I started a compliance consulting firm focused on infrastructure audits and municipal contract review. Work that required reading attachments, work that required patience. Lauren and I began couples counseling, not to restore what we had, but to understand what it was. Some structures can be reinforced. Others collapse under their own assumptions. The warehouse still stands, converted now into mixed industrial office space after I retained surface rights and leased it properly, disclosed, documented, valued accurately. Sometimes I drive past the port at night. The cranes still loom against the horizon. The air still smells of salt and steel. And beneath the concrete of that warehouse, data still moves, just no longer tied to my last name. Jason chased image. Lauren chased momentum. I followed language. And language in the end defined ownership.